Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Hello. How's it going?
Good.
Morning.
Hello. Hi. Happy Saturday, everybody. Got my coffee in a mallow cup, repping Altoona.
Those are delicious.
I know, right? We when we first moved here, we got one of those like 5-pound bags for really cheap, and then we froze them, and so it was really great. Good morning, everybody. How's it going?
Morning.
So did anyone do the kind of challenge of the camera obscura? I know Carol did. Did anyone else do it?
No.
That's okay.
No.
Okay.
It's been a busy week.
Yeah, it's definitely something to do when you're looking for something to do because it's really fun. But I saw Carol's and it was really cool how her space transformed there. So welcome.
I did a box.
You made a box.
So
Nice.
the room one was like too ambitious, but the box was like, it worked. I loved it.
That's awesome. Yeah, a box is just a small room, right? All right, cool. Well, we'll get started this week. I'm gonna do a little screen share, but just checking in. Hi, everybody. So this week we're doing portraiture, composition, and light, which is a lot of information. We're gonna review the elements of exposure, and then go through a whole bunch of photography and different ways to think about it. And then we're going to kind of touch base for what happens next week. And I do have my calendar here. So if people want to schedule their one-on-ones for next week, we can do that at the end of class. So we're just going to kind of roll into it. And if you have any questions, feel free to interrupt or put it in the chat, whatever you're feeling, so that you can ask those questions. So I'm going to do a little screen share. All right, can everyone see that as it loads up? All right, great. So we're doing portraiture, composition, and light today. And we're just gonna review these elements of exposure real quick. So we have ISO, shutter speed, and aperture. So this one, we've seen it, it captures more light. These are the worker bees of ISO. Some people call it ISO. You're fine either way. No one will judge you here. Okay, so I gotta make sure that everyone, all right, there we go. Okay, so ISO used to be methods for film photography. And then ISO was explained as worker bees last time. So you just think of it as a ton of little worker bees going out and bringing the light back for you. The more worker bees you have, the more it's going to fuzz up the image, but it will make it brighter. This is some of, what? No, okay. So here's ISO with a clean image and a noisy image. And then we have this can be the noise coming from it. I'm gonna just mute real quick. All right. Aperture is just the opening of the lens. So it's like how big the lens is open. Sometimes it's really, really small and sometimes it's really, really big. And you can see here that there are different amounts that it can be open, much like the pupil in your eye. And the pupil in your eye gets bigger when there's less light and smaller when there's more light. And this is a way that it changes exposure. You don't have to worry about those numbers. Don't get too stressed. Don't get too stressed about those numbers. They have mathematical reasons for them, but you don't have to worry about them. Depth of field is a side effect of aperture, which we talked about last week. And it's also the distance. So part of this is if you're right in front of something, like you can see in my background, almost all of that is in focus. But with something that has an aperture that's a bit wider, my background might not be in focus, but like my backyard wouldn't be in focus because it's further away. So here we have one that shows an immense depth of field. Okay. Sorry, a short depth of field. And then we have the large depth of field and shallow depths of field here on the left and right. This one, you can see that it's like all in focus from the ripples in the water to the trees, to the mountains, to the sky. It's all in focus, very fine detail. That's a large depth of field. And that is corresponds to large numbers. So like F22 would be if you're looking for this kind of landscape effect. Here we can see, we talked a lot about this stuff last week. We're just reviewing it real quick to see how you can use aperture to change how your image looks. Here you can have it, it's very popular in portraits so that you can take pictures in ugly places. We can see it again here with this nice crushed can. All right. And everyone can hear me, everyone's good with the technology right now. Okay, the chat has disappeared for me, so message if you need that. Or text me, I guess. But here is an example of like ugly places with that shallow depth of field to make it look really beautiful. You can see in this like iPhone picture on the left that she is like, everything's in focus. The lights are in focus, that fake grass is in focus. And then when you go on the right, the lights are not in focus. The grass is not in focus. Her hand isn't even in focus. So that's through shallow depth of field with aperture. And you can see that again here. Her hair is in focus. You can see like 2 or 3 bars on the fence that are in focus. But when you go on the left, you can see even the trees that are maybe, a quarter mile away in the background are pretty in focus. And here we have the same thing. So, and that little light circle is bokeh, which we talked about last time. So if you've ever taken photos of Christmas trees or Christmas lights, you have bokeh there. So, and then shutter speed is basically just how quickly it opens and closes. It's that little chink sound that you hear. Some things do it as a noise now. If you have a mirrorless camera on your phone, you might not hear that chunk, but that's what it is. And it just captures the movement and it's the speed, So we're just reviewing those elements of exposure. This is a long exposure nighttime. This is a very quick exposure of a bullet going through an apple. And then these are all of them. Very exciting, very fun. And just kind of that quick run through of what they are. If you're looking for some more review, we're happy to do it in person, virtually on one-on-ones, but also it's in the link I sent you. We recorded that and put it online for you. So lighting. So how you use your ISO, shutter speed, and aperture totally depends on what kind of lighting you're dealing with. So one of the things that like you've noticed with Zoom calls is everyone's like, how do you do your lighting? So right now I'm choosing a lighting that like the window is here, so I get this nice natural light, and then there's like my light on above that's casting this warm glow, and then back there you see I have a window that's casting a blue bright light. So this starts to be something we really are considering as we like live in a virtual world almost, of how we are using lighting to illuminate our world. So first step, you got to observe the light. So observing the light is in many ways like looking at pictures and how you exist throughout the world, but also how pictures do. So these eyeballs, okay, look, I understand they look kind of spooky, but if you look, they've got 2 little light pockets on them. So those 2 little light pockets are showing you where the light's coming from. Does everyone see those little circles of light in there? So that's where light is coming in and illuminating the rest of the face and body. So like if you're out taking a selfie, you can go through and see where the light is hitting your eyes based on those little light orbs. So like this one, you can see in her face, if you're on like a computer, you might be able to see it perhaps a little easier than on a phone, but you can see she's got one little circle in her eye. And that one little circle, this was shot with a light that was like above her and like a little bit in front of her and above. And you can just see that little circle. So you can kind of see where the light starts to come from based on that circle. And then we can see as it like the light falls off her cheek on the one side because she's angling towards it. And that's how we can start to study light. So we have different lighting scenarios. We're going to talk about indoor and outdoor lighting for portraiture primarily, but this also works if you're like taking product photography, car photography, any sort of photography. Learning how light works is really helpful, but seeing it on someone's face is also a great way, because you can see like right now on my face, like this part of my face is definitely darker. You can see the shadows. And so we're going to learn a lot more about that than perhaps like an egg. So outside, one thing I would recommend for outside photography is, like, if you can, get your subject in the shade. So what we see here is on the left, this guy is staring kind of into the sun. He's got that kind of like bright light. You can see a little bit of that shadow. The sun's kind of above him. He's pretty illuminated. Whereas on the left, he's in the shade. And so it's going to be a little softer. Here's another example of what that direct light is versus the open shade light. So the direct light on this child on the left, you see that harsh line going down from the chin? That's the direction of the light. So the sun is basically this like flashlight on this person, shining that directional light. And that's also then forming a shadow under this child's eyes and kind of different creases throughout the face. Whereas the one on the right, the face is fully illuminated. Even though they're in the shade, they are like filled with light, and they have this kind of nice quality to it. The one on the left, you can't really see any sort of light in their eye, but the one on the right, you can see there's a whole section of the eye that is illuminated by what we can assume is like concrete lit up or something. So here's another example of that. So we've got front lit sun, and that's whenever you like do the family photos and like, you know, your uncle is having everybody stare at the sun and you all squinch up and it looks like this. That happens. Side lit sun, you can see that half of the face is a little bit brighter. Backlit is what a lot of photographers do to create a kind of mood at like golden hour. And then open shade is where you get a really soft kind of even look throughout the whole image. So, oh, that's really pixelated. Sorry. This is a very soft light that's in shade. So this one's kind of back side lit. You can see how her hair is illuminated. And again, look at her eyes. Do you see that like bright light on her eyes as she's looking up towards the sky? That's then illuminating her face. And you can see on the chin here, on the jawline, that part's much darker because it's not really getting any light there. This one is a great example of backlighting. You do want to be careful because the sun might create a haze, but it does a great job of illuminating the back of the hair and creating this mood. This one is a photograph where they're standing in a forest and they have light streaming through the trees. And so you can use this kind of lighting to create an effect. Like, I very much now feel like I'm in a forest with this person and we're having this kind of experience with the light that's kind of unique to that situation. So feel free to play around with it. Outdoor lighting can be really fun. And I would recommend our challenge this week is going around and like taking selfies where you just like, you can see yourself with the lighting change. So like, if I look up there, I'm going to have a different experience with my face than if I go to the window, than if I go over here. And that's why like ring lights and window lights are used a lot for like YouTubers and people that take a lot of selfies. So if you are doing outdoor lighting, if you're finding that you want to change the light a little bit, I'd recommend something like this, but you can also use a piece of paper. If we were in person, you could probably see this a little bit better, but you see how that light shines on my face? I know you're like looking at a lot of things right now, but you can see how the light starts to bounce off of anything that's a little reflective. So just even a white piece of paper, white card, like white board, will start to do this effect. So you can really kind of start to play without, you know, spending thousands of dollars on lighting equipment. This is another example of someone using the light to then reflect into somebody else. It's a little less common, but it doesn't mean it's not common or not used or not useful. So definitely play around with different ways that you can illuminate things. And we'll talk about this also in like product photography, maybe art photography, and how that's used too. This is a great example of a backlighting golden hour sunset. And when I say golden hour, what that means is, so when the sun starts to get lower in the horizon line, it creates a much warmer light than when it's like right above us. So when it gets down here, it creates this warm golden light that then streams at a really horizontal angle. And so a lot of people like to photograph the hour before sunset because of this light quality. So that's what's happening with this photograph. this child's hair is illuminated by this golden light, and that's golden hour. In the morning, the hour around sunrise is called blue hour because the light is coming in pretty horizontally as well, but very blue. And these are atmospheric effects that also change based on where you are. So light quality is a little different in LA versus central Pennsylvania. So something to consider based on where you are is the light's going to behave a little differently because of what's happening in the air, and where, you know, on a misty morning, you're going to get a very different light than you are on like a rainy night or a early clear morning. So inside, we're going to talk a little bit about artificial lighting. You don't have to have really fancy bright lights or flashes or anything like that, but just understanding a little bit of the inside light qualities. So you can definitely get this kind of setup, and you can also recreate a lot of lighting scenarios with equipment you have at home already. So a lot of people, so these are just some examples of studio photography, and you don't need big setups. These artists, this is Richard Avedon, and he used pretty much 2 lights and a white backdrop forever. And when you're looking at these studio portraits, you can see the type of lighting used in the eyes again. So this portrait, at the top of the eye, you see that little half circle. They're using what's a circle light, basically a ring light, and just elevating it a little bit more. So that elevation of the light creates then softer fall. So you see how she has shadows under her chin, making her jawline more defined. And then she has like this little darkness here and kind of this like soft light throughout her face. And that's a very common way of photographing people because it's really flattering. So if you're looking to make really flattering portraits inside, you can do this with a lamp. You just angle it at the person, kind of turn off the rest of the lights, do it in kind of darkness, and you're going to start to see that fall, that light softness of light changing, and you get that little circle, and you can see it's a very, very flattering portrait. And here we've got another one, same style of lighting. You know, you can spend $5,000 on lights, but it's the same concept that you can use with a lamp in your home. So this is a side lighting. So you can light half the face and leave the other half to be totally dark. And this, you just, instead of taking that lamp from up here, you just put it on the side. And then this light, this face part, your right side of your face could be illuminated, left side not. And this is basically when they're staring kind of directly at the light. So you see, this is another great example of looking at the eyes. So this one, it looks like they've got 2 lights or a big whiteboard or really big light. So some places have like 6-foot light stands that they'll use, 6-foot lighting equipment. But you can do this again with kind of a diffused lamp. So that's when you would put like this white piece of paper, you just take the paper and you would put it in front of the lamp and it would diffuse the light. And diffusing the light basically makes it softer. So it's like when you have a light bulb and you put a little thing around it to keep it from just like hitting you in the face, or angling it up to the ceiling so you don't have to look directly at it. That's diffusing the light. So here's another example and another one. This is also another way you can play with lighting. You can use it to make those little lines of light and to illuminate them with a silhouette. Rembrandt lighting. So if you're into art, you can also start to see how painters have used light over the years. So Rembrandt lighting is a very specific style of lighting, and it makes a little triangle under the eye. So it's mostly this like side lit, front lit kind of thing for, you get a half of your face all lit, and then the little section has a little triangle. So I don't quite have Rembrandt lighting on me right now, but you can start to see it's really distinctive with that triangle and the light on the one side. And that's because Rembrandt used it in like all of his portraits. You can see it there. He's got that little triangle. He loved that. And you can see that if you've got your selfie front facing camera, if you go stand near a window, you can angle and make this light happen right there. It's really easy and really fun because you can just do it by a window. You don't need fancy lighting, and that's part of the reason that Rembrandt used it. You know, he didn't have fancy lighting equipment either. So here's another example of Rembrandt lighting. And you can also find, if you're like, hey, I want to learn more about interior photography, you can find all sorts of setups like this. And these are little diagrams that show you how different lighting situations are made. We're not going to go into that. This is not a studio photography class, but just so you know that it's there. If you're like, hey, how would I photograph shoes? Or I want to get this mood with my portraits. These diagrams do exist and they're a great resource. Again, you can see more types, and these are great things to do if you're like, I want to play with lights. I got this nice little lamp here. I'm going to do it. This is a great way to do it. And you can also get ones where they have pictures attached to, so you can see what that looks like. Again, a great way to show the direction of light. So this light is going into this big circle, making a bigger light that's more diffused, kind of like your ceiling and your ceiling lights. And you can see the soft way that the shadow is going away from this model, and that like half of her face is not illuminated at all because there's no light there. So miscellaneous lighting scenarios. Okay, so what do we think is happening here? What is the kind of direction of the light? And maybe I'll be able to find the chat for this. Has anyone messaged in the chat? Because I cannot see it. I don't know where it is. Chat. Someone post in the chat. Did anyone do it and I just can't see it? Oh. Oh, there it is. The light is coming from above. Jess, you are right. Chat test. Yeah, so this light is coming from above. She's kind of looking at it right there. You can see there's like a little bit of her like eyelashes are making a little bit of a mark, but mostly it's that thing that she's looking through is making a very harsh light down. So it's kind of angled, but mostly from above to make that really harsh light. So this is also one that you can see the shadows, you can see the direction, you can see the two lights in the eyes. This is a Catherine Opie piece, and you can see the two lights coming, it's like looking through almost at a window. You can see a lot of detail in those eyes. Okay, so this one, the light's super weird for being at a beach, right? This is not beach lighting, right? It looks like really gray. It's like the light is coming almost head on, but you see a little bit of that shadow under the chin. And so this is a use where someone took their lamps, basically their artificial light, soft boxes and all of that outside and photographed surfers. So this is pretty soft light, and the light is all coming from this right side here because we can see that shadow of the body on the left side, but it's really soft. It's not a harsh light. Like when I say harsh light, like this light on Angelina Jolie, the downward angle, it's a very harsh shadow. So this is very soft light. We can see that the left hand is illuminated a bit more than the right hand. But we can also see that it's coming from probably, it's very soft and coming from probably up here on the upper left, because we can't really see any of the folds in the black from below at all. So it's very soft that when we talk about fall off from the light, meaning that it kind of disappears, it's quick, it's a quick fall off. So where do we think this light's coming from? If you want to put it in the chat. Go for it. Put it in the chat, or you can say it. Her right side. Upper right. Yes, they're both kind of right. Upper right, it's on the right of her, it's on the right of the image upper part because of that shadow of the chin. So that shadow coming down the chin that we can see really clearly, her face is like perfectly illuminated, and that fall off is going downward. So it's not going like back, she's looking kind of towards the light in the upper right there, and it's falling down, and you can see the shadow of her braid, the shadow of her arm there. She's getting these nice shadows from this kind of, it's a somewhat harsher light, but it's still not totally harsh or totally soft. So you can also use light to create, if you're doing fashion photography, light can be something that you use in like this Richard Avedon photograph to capture movement, folds of the dress. And we can see with this model, the light is going like backwards to the left almost. So it's illuminating the dress. It's not about her face so much as it is about this exciting dress and its movement, the folds that are really capturing you when you look right at it. So this is the same lighting setup pretty much. Half of the face is illuminated. We see the line of the light and the shadows. And this is how we can start to read photographs so that you're like, hey, I love this photograph. How am I going to recreate this? And you're going to recreate it by reading the light and observing that. So this one, I guess, where's the light coming from? If you want to put it in the chat here, we've got Salvador Dali with his mustache and his eyebrows living. We can see that little spot in his eyes, and we're looking at that nose shadow. Left, yeah, so it's coming a little bit left and a little bit kind of up, but it's also pretty head on too. It's not like it's like left back here, because he's kind of looking at it. That's what they want, this like illumination of his face. And then you get that little shadow on his nose that's giving him a little bit of that left look. So here's another one, and he is looking almost directly at the camera. That light is right there, just a little bit above with that circle. That circle is telling you everything you need to know. And then you see on his right eye, he's getting a little bit of light hitting that circle of his eye. That's just a little bit, so that's illuminating the background in that side of his face. So you've got this one, very soft lighting. There's no shadow on the background. You can see on her dress that there's a little bit of a light on the right and in front. It's fun. So here we've got light illuminating the hair and the face. This one, it's pretty much, you can see the shadows of this. If you see the shadows on his chin, that light's coming from a little bit above, but it's not really hitting him enough that we can see any circles in the eyes. So we've really got to pay attention to like the shadow in his ear. This is an Alfred Hitchcock, a photograph of Alfred Hitchcock. And this light, you see that it's not really hitting her eyes. It's more hitting her chin here and her smile. So this image, you can see when you start to use light, you can make it about a certain feature. So if that light was all on her eyes and we could really see her eyes, it would be different, but now we're like really captured by this laugh, this smile. We can feel it a little bit differently than if we were just looking at her eyes and if the light was illuminating her eyes. So when you're looking at a photograph, you're going to go to the spot where there's the most light and the most contrast. That's where you're drawn to. And in this image, it's that like right here, this part of her face where she's smiling, where her hand is, where that light's hitting. There's so much contrast there. There's a lot of almost movement, but there's also a lot of light there. And that's where your eyes, when you go to read the photograph. So this one, again, we're looking at those circles. We can see it's coming from a little bit above and doing a shadow on the chin. Right, it almost seems easy, right? So this one is much softer lighting from up top. And this is Robert Mapplethorpe. And this is a much harsher lighting. You can see that shadow is really harsh. And don't these do two very different moods? They're very different in the, you know, he's almost wearing the exact same thing. You know, he's not smoking in the one, his hair's a little different, but you can see the kind of change in expression with the photograph. His face almost doesn't change, but he's somehow feeling a little bit harsher in this one because of the way the light is. He has a different mood than this one, the younger one. So something to consider as you're photographing is you can change the way people feel about themselves and about the subject and the mood through lighting. So here's a different one of him, much softer lighting than this one, and a much different take on photography there. So this one, we also get that big lighting, high contrast. And where do your eyes go immediately? You're immediately drawn to her eyes because there's so much contrast with the eyebrows and the makeup and the rest of the image that you're just like right there. And the composition also will allow you to just like zone in right there real quickly. So you can also use light to block light, create different stories. We have Frida Kahlo here with like a 3-point lighting setup, which is kind of crazy. We see the two lights in her eyes, and there's like one on her left eye that you can see up top, but you can also see in her hair that bow is illuminated on that kind of right side of her. So, and here's another one of her. You can see that like that temple is a little bit illuminated, and a lot of people do that to separate people from the background, just so you know. This is a much softer lighting, and we can see the shadow behind her, so we can start to see where the light's coming from. This image of Gordon Parks is like, you know, he's doing a little like straining his face because he's pretty much looking at a spotlight at this point. So that's something too, is how the light happens for your model also changes how they might react to it. So if you're dealing with a person versus say a product, they might be staring at a light going, "Ooh, that's really bright," and that's going to change their expression. Like he would look a little differently if this was the style of lighting that he was looking at. Okay, so we're going to keep rolling with this. There's one question in the chat that says, should you turn off the flash on an iPhone Pro when you are by a window or a light? That depends if you are looking for that flash quality. So I'm going to show some pictures using artificial flash and how it was used in different ways. But generally, you're going to get enough light from a window or a light that your iPhone flash won't make too much of a difference. If you have a camera, your flash is going to be a little bit stronger and might change that. But I've noticed with most phones, their flash can't overpower the sun. So that's something to consider, and it will be different, but I would play with it to see if that's something you like. So this is a great example of mixing artificial light and outdoor lighting. So with this one, this individual had really powerful lights that were able to kind of beat the sun. And so these, you can see there's a little bit of that shadow in the feet that go down. They're pretty well illuminated, but you can see on the chin, it's that harsh line. So, and we can see the shadows as they go back. This is a Comic-Con in Florida. And so this one, you can see where the light is hitting. So it's hitting this young girl, but it's hitting all of these other people too. And you can see the shadows and it creates a kind of drama inside. And so that's how you can use these lights to change the mood. And you can see the shadow of this person in the background so that he's just kind of staring right at it, but he does have, it's a little bit up. You can see that shadow on the chin. So, and you know, they've been using artificial lighting since pretty much the dawn of photography, because photography has been so delicate and needed so much light that they've been really incorporating ways to control light. So you were asking about the flash on an iPhone Pro. So this is a Nan Goldin photograph, and she photographed her friends in New York City in the 70s, 80s, 90s. And she wanted to show this kind of intimacy through flash. So she used flash like this to capture this kind of intimate life almost that she was having with these people and these moments. And this could be a way that you photograph your life too, of basically almost that disposable kind of flash, that rawness. But you could also go closer to windows for softer light, for more delicate light. But there is something to be said for the mood of lighting. So this image, this is Jesse Dittmar, who we'll see more of his work later. And you can see some of the lighting equipment in this. And big groups can get really complicated when you're inside. And I guess I would recommend taking them outside if you're photographing really big groups like this. But in this shot, we can see where the light's coming from. We can see those shadows. We can see how it changes a little bit on each person, but all the light's kind of coming a little bit from above. If you're directly from above, you'll start to get some of the hooded light eyes that you can see on like me, for example, because my light is up above. But if you have it a little bit of in front and above, that's a really flattering angle for the chin. So here's another example. He tends to use like a single light and create those shadows. Now, when you're creating a portrait, you can also start to think about the story you tell. So if you want to tell a story about, say, a violinist, they could use their violin, they could show you their studio at their home. My dog's coming over to say hi. Hi, Rye. She's just hanging out. Wanted to hear more about the violinist. So that could be something that you start to do with portraiture is, you know, maybe you want to take a portrait of a friend and they're big into knitting. You could show some of their tools of the trade. So these are different studio photography elements. And don't be afraid, you don't need to have a studio to take studio quality photographs. You can do them with a wall or a sheet of paper. I'm going to show you some later on. I'm going to show you some images of lay flat photography and product photography, food photography that are pretty easy to do at home. So we're going to look at photographing the body from the, we're going to show photographing the body with the Sports Illustrated style. So this is, again, really like kind of soft lighting to show the anatomy. And a lot of, you see this a lot in drawing too, with figurative drawing and painting, of really how photography and light can be used to create more definition and sculpture. So in this, part of it is that the way the light exists is it can make these abs look better. You know, that's creating more shadow in the abs to make them look even more ripped than they are. Now, this could be the opposite effect too of, could also then show more cellulite. So this is also something, depending on the light you use, can be more flattering or not as flattering, depending on what you're looking for. So these are using some pretty powerful lights to get that shine on the leg, and of course, oils and all sorts of things. But to be fair, it's a lot of information to kind of capture with the way light is working here. So like, and they're specifically using darkness as well to hide things and make it more about the like physicality of the body. So, and in this one, we can see in his eye, he's got that one eye that's like illuminated, and it's kind of this like light from above, and you can see that back leg, there's almost no light at all in it. And I think they're kind of pointing to the fact that that's not important in this image. We're looking at, you know, the strength from his core and his arms and his legs. This is a powerhouse batter, and you don't need to see what's in that knee on the right side. You already got that one. So this is, I think, Marshawn Lynch, and this is a great image, and also kind of ties into almost looking like ballet, but it's football. And so they're really, this, you can see the direction of the light, the way it's going around. And this is a really great series if you're looking at capturing people and the body and movement, because they do it in a lot of really interesting ways using light. So this is that Rembrandt lighting, soft lighting, and this is really directional. You can see the light hitting her face, and you see those little dots, but you can see that like basically from her neck down, she is not illuminated. You can still see that things are happening, but it's not really illuminated in the same way. This is that harsh side lighting, but you still have a little bit of Rembrandt. So both of these have that Rembrandt triangle. All right, so we're going into product photography here. Feel free to put your questions in the chat. We're gonna keep rolling. So product photography, this one we've got, okay, how are you gonna get the, let's talk technical. How are you going to get the splash to capture perfectly? You're gonna need a fast shutter speed. So that is a lot of movement. You need a lot of light, because a fast shutter speed doesn't allow a lot of light to come in for a long period of time. So you want to see it capture that explosion of water and light quickly. The light is behind, it's illuminating the background and the actual product, but it's also illuminating the water splash. So this is something that is perfect for looking at the technical with light. You're going to need a really fast shutter speed to capture that. And you can see there's like a stream of water in the middle here, like it goes across. It's not super in focus. So they're not using f/22, they're probably using more like an f/4. Just as like we start to read images and understand the technical. So now if you're doing phone photography, if you're looking to do some lay flats or products, I would recommend getting a big old sheet of paper like this. So get that big old sheet of paper, put it by a window, and you're gonna see like in the right, you can see that the like window is streaming in light. You have these two little candles that are making a little bit of light. And then there's some shading and shadow in between. And so you can use this as a great opportunity to start to photograph products with just a little bit of window light and a piece of paper. And the light is bouncing off that piece of paper to then make it so it's a more even shot. So I just wanted to show this to you because it shows sometimes how much Photoshop can go into end product photography. So this little GIF that we're looking at here is showing the start with all of those things and then editing out other things. So to make it this final image, I've used a lot of Photoshop in my day. It can be really fun to edit out things. And if anyone wants to talk about that in the one-on-ones, I'm happy to do it. But this is a great example of sometimes how much work can go into product photography. So wherever you can, capturing these shoes in midair would be very tricky. So this photographer is using stands and lights and then a bunch of editing to capture that. So this is a great example of lighting and products. You're not going to you'd have to do a little bit of editing sometimes with watches and things if you're putting them on pedestals or strings. But it's really fun to see different ways that things are photographed. So they're using a little bit of a fog machine with some harsh lighting right behind and maybe even underneath that Bombay sapphire. And you don't need much equipment. So one of the challenges that I thought would be fun for me that I did last year was I photographed using a flashlight, and I photographed my various bottles and my favorite dishes with a flashlight, window light and other things. But it was really fun to capture that and know that your flashlight really is going to give you a lot of information, a lot of help with light. So this is another example of a lay flat. So lay flat's used a lot in Instagram and in product photography right now to make a composition of stuff and products. And what we see here is there's a window at the top of what is the top of our screen. There's a window there, and that window is coming out. It's hitting that little cardboard, that white cardboard, and that white cardboard is bouncing that light back onto the products. And then the products are sitting on this whiteboard that then is illuminating it from below. So light is multi-directional, and just like we showed earlier, it's gonna, as you see with this light here in my face, it's gonna change and illuminate. So we're gonna show that. So they're called fill cards. You can just call them white cardboard. I'm gonna understand it. And this shows you the large window on the left side, and then you have light that's illuminating. When we look at the image on the right side, we can see there's a little bit of a shadow coming from the window. You know, that Prosecco has a little bit of darkness, dark shadow behind it, but it's not much. It's pretty soft. So that's a way that you can do lay flat photography and product photography in a pretty easy way. This is another example of like how you can use that classic still life lighting that's coming in from the window. Maybe you're using that white cardboard on the one side to illuminate it back. And you can use different backdrops using different pieces like a nice quilt, or I've used an old cookie sheet before because it can be really textured and fun. So you can use different things there to give you a background. Here's another example of how you could make a all-encompassing light system for a watch. All right, and then you can also start to recreate some of those iconic paintings using window light. They used a lot of window light. They didn't have fancy strobes that, fashion photographers now have, but they had window light. So you can start to recreate some of these paintings using window light. And if you've seen any of the kind of early pandemic things of people recreating like the Mona Lisa, a lot of times they replicated the light in those paintings, and then of course the costumes and everything else, but you can start to use some of those painting masters techniques to use light. So again, look at the light in this woman's eyes. She's got that one little slit there, And you can see the harsh fallout on the shadow on the cheeks, the shadow on the jaw, and the way that that's kind of darkened under here, but her face is pretty illuminated. So portraiture, I know we've done a lot of portraiture right now, just like looking at things, but there's so much. So, all right, we're going to talk about a few of the great portraiture photographers and also some of the methods. So this is Annie Leibovitz. She's one of the most famous world-renowned portrait photographers now. So this is a portrait she took, obviously, of Leonardo DiCaprio. And technically, let's look at this image. When we talk about composition, this is a great image to see. On the left side, we have what's called negative space. So there's not a lot of information in there. It's just kind of grass. But that kind of leads us into him and gives him enough space to start to be noticed, which he's obviously very well noticed. He has a lot of contrast with the swan going around his neck, and he's staring at us pretty head on. And we would probably describe this lighting best as like cloudy day lighting. We can see there's a little bit of a shadow on the one side of his face, but it's not that noticeable. He's pretty diffused in the lighting. And technically we're looking at a shallow depth of field because the back of that image is pretty out of focus. We can see the grass just gets out of focus very quickly. So Angelina Jolie, again, she's got a very harsh light on her compared to Leonardo DiCaprio. Angelina Jolie, you can see, I mean, her cheekbones have a harsh line anyway, but we also have the chin. You see that jawline just very dark, very quickly right underneath it. So she's got a light that's coming from above her, and it's much harsher than that kind of daylight, soft light that we see on Leonardo DiCaprio. So, this is a fun one to see, just some of the ways that she plays with portraiture and lighting. She did all of the Star Wars promotional photographs. She also photographed things like this, which have, a combination of window light and other things, which is pretty fun. She's photographed, and I think it's important to note that she's putting people in context a lot. So these images, there's no context. We know Angelina Jolie, it's a dark studio, it's a black background. Here it's just like Leonardo DiCaprio hugging a swan in a field. I'm not familiar with his work that he's ever done that as a character, but I don't learn anything really about him other than like, what a cutie. But in these, we learn a lot about the Kim Kardashian West, Kanye West experience in this image. We get that it's all about the selfie with the camera, with the phone, and then we get the iPad, and we get the bling on her ring and his wrist, and you have the chandelier, and there's a giraffe, and then there's like all of this baby stuff, but it's all kind of this like pink and beige. And so we're starting to build a story based on the room they're in, and the way that Annie Leibovitz is walking us through their experience in their lives. And that's something that we all kind of start to do with Zoom rooms. For example, like you see I have art in mine and I have plants, and you start to build this story about who I am based on what the frame is. So as you get to go into these places and photograph people, you can also see how you might tell their story. So we can understand that maybe this person has something to do with education. Maybe they're a student themselves, maybe they're an educator. So we start to build the story here with the world that she's giving us. This woman has a very specific type of desk and outfit, and is like, obviously kind of commanding with her arms crossed, and she has pictures in the background, and she's in an urban area. So this can be ways that you start to construct narratives of the space for the person or thing you're photographing. So if you're photographing an artwork and it's in a gallery, it's going to be a very different story than if you're photographing like your sculpture underneath a bridge. Those are going to be very different. Just as, if you're photographing a car and it's on a highway, or if it's on a mountaintop, those are very different places that all have symbols and meanings attached to them that you're going to want to consider as you take your pictures. So, I would look very different if this was my Zoom background right now. Everyone would be like, what are you doing? If I'm hanging out with the queen in the background here with this kind of space, totally different from the kind of expectation. So, but if she was in my home, my home would look very different as well with her in it. So thinking about the context of what you're photographing and the kind of setup of the rooms gives us all an understanding of what the subject is and its importance. You know, if I threw my artwork in the trash and took a picture of it there, I'm not giving it the same level of reverence as if I hung it on this beautiful white wall and, you know, photographed it like the Mona Lisa. So, and in portraiture, this is that shallow depth of field, soft background, persons in focus. We have no idea where they are. So in this one, the queen, we know exactly, she's in one of her many palaces. I don't know which one, but she's like looking super regal. That space is telling you she is pretty well off. This, we have almost no information about the person. But if this is a person you love, this is a great portrait. Like, this is someone you know and love. What a great smile. I loved her smile. Like, I can hear her laugh, but like, I don't know her. So this, to me, I can't understand this person very much other than like, nice smile. So it really depends on the story you're trying to tell. So this is the same kind of thing. We can't tell where they are, but it's a great photograph of them, a really beautiful portrait. And it's fun to think about people as muses. So like if you have a family member or someone you're like living with or someone you see frequently, you could start to think about the different ways you could capture their personality. So Georgia O'Keeffe was a famous painter, and she was married to a photographer and was an inspiration for photographers all over the world. And we can see these different ways that they experienced her and photographed her through their own understanding. So you can see her painting, you can see her love of the Southwest, her style of dress. And so we start to see all of these different ways that you can express who a person is. And so we're kind of running shorter on time than I would like to with as many slides as I have left. So we're going to keep rolling through them pretty quickly here, but you can see just all the different ways she's been photographed and like how they've been able to show her personality through that. Salvador Dali was a big personality, and he was photographed in a lot of ways that respected his kind of surrealist art. And so this is a Philippe Halsman photograph. And so they're capturing his personality in a way that like might be different from yours or mine. This photograph, also by Philippe Halsman, has a really great video where they talk about the throwing of the cats in the water, because this is film photography. They didn't really edit it together. But because he's a surrealist painter, they made this surrealist scene of chaos and insanity that's like wonderful, and a wonderful representation of who this person is. So no studio lighting, remember, that's not a problem. Here's a beautiful lamp, you can use it. Window light is great. Flashlights are fun. Just be prepared that it might not be a ton of light, especially if you're photographing at night in the dark. You might need to just like start practicing during daylight and then going into night. And this image, I just wanted to show you, this is a great example of using a slow shutter speed. All of the dancers in the background are moving, and so we can't really, dancers and I guess someone on what are those pole sticks? What are they called when they go on your feet? Oh no, I don't know what they're called. If anyone knows, please put it in the chat. What are they?
Stilts.
What?
Stilts.
Stilts. We have someone on stilts in the back. Thank you. Stilts in the back. And there's all this movement, but we're clearly told to look at this one person who's perfectly in focus, not moving, very calm, with the rest of the world kind of being chaotic. So, and this is another example of a way that you can use light to start to tell the story of the space and the person. And here's another one that Annie took as well. So Richard Avedon was well known for this portrait of American laborers of the American West. And so he took all sorts of photographs. You've seen some of his work already. He took mostly in front of, this is Andy Warhol, in front of white backdrops. And so I just wanted to show you this. You don't need that fancy studio to take really great photographs. This was his setup for some of the times he was in the American West. He'd put a big piece of white paper out, tape it to the side of a building, use his big camera and photograph it. And here's another example of that, of just him using tape and roughly putting it up. And that image was taken, this image was taken in that exact same way. It's just a taped up piece of white paper and photographed. And that can be something you use if you're like, hey, I don't, my house is too dark. I don't want to use this lamp. It's not working. You can take your bed sheet or whatever outside and start photographing that way, in the same way that Richard Avedon did. And you can also take great photographs of people out in the world. And this is Steve McCurry. He's a famous photojournalist who takes portraits of people on assignment for National Geographic, among other organizations. So he does doesn't do much studio work, but does create these beautiful portraits out in the world. Annie Leibovitz, again, photographing the Queen. And this is a very different look for the Queen than if she was in her estate, her house that she was before. And here she is in her house, and it's much more relaxed with her grandchildren. But here, like, we get really this like British countryside classic, this big storm. You can start to read into the symbolism of these things. This is another Annie Leibovitz photograph. Another one. She's done a lot of studio photography. This is another one of hers. She took this photograph as well. And Philippe Halsman, we looked at his work before, and his is these surrealist things. So you can capture people in your own style. Like, we can understand he has a very different style than Annie does, but that doesn't mean that it's not good. It's really exciting to see these different takes on people. And again, with those lights. And also I want to stress that, like, not every photograph has to be perfect. So we can see here the like pictures they liked or didn't like. And that's true. Like, when I take a selfie, it's going to be like 50 tries minimum to get the one that I'm like, perfect, we nailed it. And that's true of, like, as you're photographing, don't expect every single one to be good. Make adjustments, take a bunch, and then delete the ones you don't like. Here's another example of very famous photographers taking a bunch of photos of the same thing and only deciding on one. You know, like, this is the one I like, this one's fine, let's see it printed. And you can also work to make your subject comfortable or uncomfortable with the way that you photograph them. You can tell the story, their story, through a photograph. And this is Jessie Dittmar again. And you can start to understand who these people are by the scene that they're in. For all of these people, you know, this person probably works in fashion. It's just going to be your number one guess here as you see this space laid out for you. You know, Judy Blume, we probably all know her, but this is pretty much the energy I expect from Judy Blume, as well as like just the mountains of books as she's signing them. You know, it feels very this kind of organic, this is her, here she is. And this one, we get to see this Betsy DeVos, you know, whatever your political leanings, you can read what this is, who she is, what she does. She's got the apple, she's got the ruler, you know, she's looking kind of this like sitting kind of perfectly dignified with like a small smile, but she's not too happy. She's got a lot of work to do. So you can read these things and really understand who these people are. Now, we only have 2 minutes for composition, which I feel like is not enough time, because I really wanted to get into portraiture and lighting, because that's really going to help. If folks are interested in staying 10 minutes, I know we kind of said we'd do a tight hour, but I would love to give this information if we could do that in 10 minutes. If people want to vote in the chat on whether they like, hey, I've got to leave now, or if we want to just keep rolling with composition, that would be awesome. Carol can stay. You don't have to stay, everybody. Okay. 10 minutes, keep rolling seems to be the thing. We can review this next week too, and we'll put this online if you can't stay. So we're just gonna keep going with it then. Composition, here we go. All right, so rule of thirds. This is the kind of iconic photography, like rule of thirds, here we go. And it's what happens if you're on your phone. You might see it on Instagram when you go to public, put an image up, it's rule of thirds. It's when you see The Office, it's why they're kind of off center in like those interviews, because rule of thirds generally means that where the intersections are where you should put that interesting information. So interesting information, this is a character Jim Halpert's face, and you can see he's kind of off to the side. There's nothing really going on this side, but you're drawn to that one spot because of the way your eye moves. And start to like track the way your eye looks at a photograph the first time it sees it. Because you're going to start to see that it's immediately drawn to a certain area because of composition, lighting, contrast. So leading lines, another great one. If you have the information of your background and environment all pointing to one thing, then everyone's eye is going to go right there. So here we have at the center, high contrast and this like figure with movement. And then we have all of this information going right there. So here we have leading lines that lead you through the mountain, up to the mountain. We have this little road that brings you right there to that mountain where the sun is rising. We have these leading lines of the lavender field. All of this leads to this guy's face. Do you see those lines in the ceiling? And then all of the lines of the windows are just pulling you into him. We get the two shoulders that are starting to frame him. We're being pulled in right to his face. Which almost has that Rembrandt lighting that we learned about, and a little bit of a shallow depth of field there. So here we have high contrast in the middle and leading lines from the bottom, the foreground of the photograph, all the way to that center. So these leading lines can be a great way to just pull the eye to where you want it to be. So this eye is going right to this woman's face, and we can see those leading lines. She's at the center of that. She's the most important part, and we can get that as it leads to her. Another great example, if you're doing landscape photography, you can really pull the eye through based on leading lines. This is another great example of how we see those little arrows added afterwards, but you can see how it pulls you through into that tree and in through the photograph because of the lines that are made. So a leading line doesn't have to be straight. It can be curved, but it's going to be something that your eye kind of travels, almost like a car. Center composition and symmetry. So some people like to do it like, I'm symmetrical, here's everything, it's perfect. Some people like to do asymmetrical. Feel free to experiment with this. But you can see how this image is particularly strong because it is symmetrical. So we have that chateau almost in the background there, all the way down at the end of this canal. And looking at this canal, we've got this like the trees, and then we have the like reflection of everything that's happening, and it's creating symmetry north and south and east and west in our photograph. So we can see everything almost twice, and we're given this kind of wonderful feeling of like, perfect, like it's happened, like we've seen it. This is so rare in the world that sometimes it just feels really satisfying to see. And this quote, "You don't take a photograph, you make it," is something I want you all to think about as you're taking your photographs and making your photographs, because it feels like things just happen in the world and you can capture them. But when you're working on a photograph and photography, you really have a lot of say in what's in the frame. So the layered look, and some of these are from, if you want to take great photographs, read this book, because they have a lot of really great tools for composition. And the layered look is really that you can see in this that the foreground has a lot of information as well as the background and the far background. So that each section you get this kind of layering of information. So you can see in this one, the foreground, on the bottom, you can see that it's got a lot of rocks and detail and information. And so you're kind of led through, you're in there and then you keep going. All right. Jenna recommends the book, by the way, everyone. Thanks, Jenna. I think someone told me it was available for $10. So if you're able to, it's really useful. Frame within a frame. So this could be something that you're like, hey, I want to capture a thing and I want it to be a little interesting, a little fun. You can capture something or someone using existing frames. And that could be a photo frame that you take everything out of and you're like, here you go. It could also be just like you frame things with things that already exist, like door arches, or with window frames, or maybe you frame them with a tree. Maybe there's a tree that you can like photograph through and then they're framed by the leaves of that tree. You can also use patterns and textures for your composition. So like this, you get the pattern of the foreground, and the foreground is what's in front of us here, that like bottom part that's closest to us. We can see the foreground kind of moving with its just kind of simple pattern that's beautiful. And then we get into the actual architectural piece. There's a lot of repetition of pattern throughout this. Filling the frame. So one of the photographer quotes that I've heard a lot of is like, get close and then get closer. Of like, a lot of times you want to maintain your 6 feet of social distancing for everything you're photographing, but feel free to get close. What does your bagel look like when it's like the whole thing is in the frame? Like you are in there really photographing that bagel. So this is an example, especially the lion. You're not seeing the context of where the lion is. You're not seeing the full mane. You're just like focused right there on the face. And that lion is commanding the whole composition. Just like this picture of Notre Dame, the whole thing is taking up the frame. You're not getting the extra context of where it is or what's happening on the river beside it. You are just like, what a beautiful facade. It has filled the frame. Opposite of that. So you can do that where you're like zoomed in and here it is, like the whole face is commanding, or you can leave negative space. So like this image, instead of letting her face be the whole thing, they've left all this space outside of her in the sky that you can really kind of linger with, that it almost feels like that left side, you can then come into her as like you're reading left to right. You then get to see her face in a different way. Moving the eye. So a lot of like Western people will read your work left to right. So if you read language right to left or up or down, you might start up or right, but most people that are going to see your work are going to read it left to right. So if you're reading something left to right, it's going to move your eye through it left to right. So you might want to have movement or something that pulls you left to right. You kind of always want to encourage people through the composition. So if your composition's a map, you start somewhere and then you just kind of pull them through the image. So here we have the singer on the left, singing, playing, and then we're like pulled through by those leading lines of the leading lines of that thing, whatever that's called, because I totally blanked on it. And then you come into this like fight almost that's happening. That's like this great movement, but like my eye first went to the guy on the left singing a song. I was like, what a great little scene. And then I'm pulled in and I'm like, wait a minute, those people are fighting? So you're like kind of given this great opportunity to bring people into this kind of, like I was lured into this false sense of security of like this great tourist photo of Paris, and this great day. And now here we are with this like almost fight scene that feels almost secondary to like the music. So this left to right can also be used in movement, but just something to be aware of how people's eyes move through the scene. And the decisive moment, I think this will be almost our last slides here. This was by Henri Cartier-Bresson. He's a famous photographer in history of photography, very important. Oh, they think they're dancing. It could be, yeah, I like that. That's nicer. That's a nicer choice than they're fighting. Dancing. The other guy certainly seems less concerned about it, so I'm gonna guess dancing is probably the right way to do it. So another important thing, people will read your photographs a ton of different ways. So this decisive moment, this artist thought that like you should lie in wait for the perfect photograph of like, there will be a moment where everything lines up. And so he photographed a lot like he would stand in this stairwell and wait for someone to walk by. And in this case, bike by. And so that it would hit that kind of in between the stairwell, perfect composition at that moment. So, and that like someone jumping is going to be the thing that makes this photograph. And that could be something that you're like, hey, I've got this awesome window I want to photograph out of, and I'm going to wait until my neighbor brings their dog out and goes on a walk, and I'm going to capture them right as they walk through, which I think is like a fun way to think about it. Some photographers call it hunting kind of for the right image when you shoot capturing that good image. So this is a great, I'm going to send you all this link because it explains composition in a really wonderful way. I will send you all this link. I was going to put it in the chat, but it's going to open up differently. But it provides a lot of, it's Steve McCurry talking about his composition methods through his photographs. And then he like sends overlays and different things so you can see the way it works. And that's going to be it for today. I did say it'd be 10 minutes and it was 9, so we did it. So that's really kind of the start to all of that. It was a lot of information, but the more photographs you start to absorb and observe and read, the better your photography is going to become, the more we're going to be able to really understand photography and have a and understand how to make other people love your work and how it's read too, because it's going to be read a lot of different ways. So the challenge this week, I would encourage you all, if you're able to take like your phone or camera and like you can take pictures of other people, but to take pictures of yourself, not ones that necessarily have to be good, but like, what do you look like with a flashlight shining on your face versus like a window? What do you look like with like that, my overhead light? Or what do you look like with morning light or evening light? So really just like going around, and you could just be like, all right, I'm going to turn the lights off now. And just like having it so that you can see that. There's a lot of really fun videos that show how light changes the way a face looks. And that I think is a really great way to explore how your face absorbs light and how light works. So if you would all like to, if you want to stay after to schedule a one-on-one meeting, please do. Otherwise, that's really it for today. Thank you everyone for coming. I'm going to stop this screen sharing. And next week we will be doing genres of photography and different things like that. So I appreciate that. And if you want to stay and get a meeting, let's do that now. I'm going to turn off the recording.